Okay, so this one's not a college case, so it's a little different. And in this one, we're taking a look at a Seattle school district. So parents involved in community schools. This was an organization that was created because they didn't like the way that the Seattle school system was handling desegregation, and they went up against the Seattle School District number one in 2007. Um, so here's the facts. The Seattle School District had at that time tried to solve problems of segregation in the district. Um, so you could actually apply to a high school. You didn't. There were multiple schools. Like in South Brunswick, we have one school, but if you go to Hamilton, as you guys did in your research and inquiry that you handed in, um, there are multiple schools in the town, and I don't know how many there are in Seattle. I imagine there's probably more than three. So schools can, at that point, like you apply to get into a school. Some schools are better than others, or thought of as to be better than others. And so, what do you do when some schools kind of get too many people that want to go there? They call that oversubscribed. So, um, when too many students chose a particular school, when too many students chose them as their first choice, the district used a system of tiebreakers to determine whether or not you would get into a particular school, where students would be admitted to one of the more popular schools. So you'd apply to the school and you don't get in, but there's maybe like a tiebreaker that can happen. The first factor was something else, but the second most important factor that determined whether or not you would be able to get into the school was a racial factor that was done to maintain racial diversity. Now, this affected white people and black people. If you're trying to get into a school that was a popular school that was black, if you were white, and it was the second tiebreaker point, you could get in because you were white. Or it could go the other way. You could be in a school where you're trying to get into a popular school that's mostly white, and you try to get in, and you're a black kid, and now you get in because it's the second most tiebreaker. So it could be a factor going not just for white, for not just for black people, but also for white people. So here's how it worked. If the racial demographics of any one of the school's student body deviated more than a predetermined number of percentage points from the Seattle's total student population, 40% white and 60% non-white, then the racial tiebreaker went into effect. So if you're at a school where there's, you know, you know, not 40-60, like let's say it was a school where there were, let's say 20% white people and 80% non-white, then the racial tiebreaker would go into effect if you were trying to apply to that school. And if you were, like I said, 80%, uh, sorry, 20% white and 80% non-white, if you were white, then you'd get into that school. If you were black, maybe you wouldn't if it was a tiebreaker needed to be used. Um, at a particular school, whether whites or non-whites could be favored for admission, depending on which race would bring the racial balance to a closer goal. So they're just trying to achieve racial balance in the school to match what the school's population was generally, which was 40% white and 60% non-white, so mostly non-white. So there was a parent group that got formed, like I said, called the Parents Involved in Community Schools. And they sued the district. And their argument was that this racial tiebreaker was a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. And so that was what the question was asked of the court. Is this tiebreaker system constitutional? Can you use this as a way of desegregating schools? Now, previously they had done busing that had existed in other parts of the country where they tried to achieve racial balance. But can you do it this way? So the level of scrutiny you need to use here, because it's dealing with race, whether it's white, black, and different, I don't care. You always end up using something called strict scrutiny. So that's like really high level. And we talked about that at the beginning. Um, Basically, the court said, no, this is unconstitutional. The plan was not narrowly tailored to the state's compelling interest. The plan only helped them achieve a demographic goal as opposed to an educational benefit. So just demographics, not really about trying to have diversity as a factor. So they didn't have a good program there. So you can't have a quota system. You can't use a rubric. And you can't do this racial balancing thing with a tiebreaker. It has to be highly, highly individualized kind of affirmative action program for it to survive strict scrutiny by the courts. So you can do affirmative action programs in the United States, but they're very difficult to get past the court. So the question I ask is, what advice would you give a school that wanted to implement an affirmative action program? What kind of programs work? What kinds don't work? What do you think is the best way to do it if you're like a lawyer looking at all these cases? How would you determine what kinds of programs would be okay and what kind of programs would not?